I donated my deceased daughter's college fund instead of giving it to my husband's daughter. My daughter Emma died in a car accident when she was 16. She had this college fund that my ex-husband and I had been putting money into since she was like 3 years old. By the time she passed, there was about $43,000 in there. My ex and I agreed we'd figure out what to do with it later. But honestly, we were both too messed up to even think about money. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm remarried to this guy, Kevin. He's got a 17-year-old daughter named Jess from his first marriage. Don't get me wrong. Jess is a sweet kid, but she's not my daughter. Kevin knew about Emma's college fund from early on in our relationship. I told him about it one night when we were talking about our kids and our past marriages. So, last month, Jess gets accepted to this fancy art school in California. The tuition is insane, like $60,000 a year. Kevin's been stressing about how they're going to pay for it, because his ex-wife doesn't contribute much to anything. He works at a hardware store and makes decent money, but not art school money. One night, we're sitting at the kitchen table, going through all these financial aid forms and loan applications. Kevin's calculator is out. He's got his reading glasses on, and there's papers everywhere. Jess is in her room, probably stressed out of her mind about whether she'll even be able to go to the school she's dreamed about since middle school. Kevin looks up at me and goes, I've been thinking about Emma's college fund. My stomach immediately dropped because I knew where this was going. He continues, Emma can't use it anymore, and Jess really needs help with school. It would solve all our problems. I just stared at him for like 10 seconds. The audacity of this man asking me to give my dead daughter's college money to his kid was beyond anything I could have imagined. I told him absolutely not. And he got all defensive, saying how we're supposed to be a family now, and that Emma would have wanted to help Jess. That last part really pissed me off because how dare he speak for my daughter, who he never even met? Emma died 2 months before Kevin and I started dating. He has no idea what Emma would have wanted, and frankly, it doesn't matter because that money represents 17 years of me and my ex-husband sacrificing things so our daughter could have opportunities. Kevin kept pushing the issue over the next few days. He'd bring it up during dinner or when we were watching TV, always with this tone like I was being unreasonable. He even had Jess talk to me about it, which made me furious because now he's got his kid involved in manipulating me. So, I made a decision. I called the college fund company and had them cut me a check for the full amount. Then I drove to the Children's Hospital, where Emma spent her last week, and donated every single penny to their pediatric trauma unit. I specifically requested that it go toward helping families who can't afford treatment for their kids. When I got home, Kevin was in the garage working on his motorcycle. I walked out there and told him what I'd done. His face went from confused to angry to completely red. He started yelling about how I just screwed over his daughter and how selfish I was being. He said I was punishing Jess for something that wasn't her fault. I told him he was right. It wasn't Jess's fault. It also wasn't my responsibility to pay for her college with my dead daughter's money. I explained that the money went somewhere that would actually honor Emma's memory, instead of just solving Kevin's financial problems. Kevin stormed into the house and called his sister to complain about me. I could hear him on the phone in the living room talking about how I'm cold and heartless. His sister apparently agreed with him because she called me later that night to tell me I should have considered Kevin's family as my family, too. The next morning, Kevin barely spoke to me. He made coffee for himself, but didn't offer me any, which is petty. But whatever. Jess came down for breakfast and she looked like she'd been crying. Kevin had obviously told her what happened. She didn't say anything to me, and that silence at the breakfast table hurt in a very specific way because it wasn't loud or angry. It was thick with things left unsaid and emotions that had been dumped onto a 17-year-old who never asked to be put in the middle of adult grief and financial desperation. And I hated that Kevin had told Jess in a way that clearly framed me as a villain. Because no matter how justified my decision was, she was still a kid processing rejection and disappointment. And that realization is what made me pull Jess aside later that afternoon when Kevin went out to cool off. Because I refused to let her carry a version of the story where she believed she had done something wrong, or that she'd somehow failed to be lovable enough to deserve help. And I told her calmly and honestly that the money was never about her. That it wasn't taken away from her because of who she was or what she wanted to study, but because it was tied to my daughter and my grief and a promise made long before I ever knew her father. And I apologized to her for being put in the middle of something that should have stayed between adults. And she cried again, but this time she nodded and said she understood even if it still hurt. And that moment alone made me angrier at Kevin than anything else, because he had weaponized his daughter's vulnerability instead of protecting her from it. And when Kevin came home that night, he was still defensive. still convinced that what I'd done was a betrayal of our marriage. And we had the hardest conversation we've ever had, where I told him plainly that blending families does not mean erasing the past, or reallocating grief to solve present problems, and that my love for him does not entitle him to assets created for a child he never knew. And he tried again to frame it as practicality and fairness, saying the money was just sitting there. And that's when I finally said the thing I'd been holding back, which was that to me the money wasn't sitting anywhere. It was sitting inside every memory of packing lunches, skipping vacations, saying no to things I wanted because that fun represented hope for a future that was stolen from us, and turning it into tuition for someone else without my consent would have felt like erasing Emma all over again. And that seemed to finally land because Kevin went quiet in a way that wasn't sulking, but stunned, like he was realizing for the first time that he'd been looking at that account as a solution instead of a memorial. And the next few days were tense but different, because he stopped pushing and instead started avoiding the topic entirely, which wasn't ideal but was at least a step away from entitlement. And his sister backed off after I told her firmly that she didn't get to weigh in on a decision involving my dead child. And interestingly, my ex-husband called me after the donation went through because the hospital sent him a thank you letter as well. And he cried on the phone and told me it was exactly what Emma would have wanted, not because she would have denied help to anyone else, but because she always talked about wanting to help kids who were scared and hurting, and hearing that from the only other person who truly understood what that money represented brought me a sense of peace I hadn't felt since she died. And when I told Kevin about that call, he didn't argue. He just nodded and said he was sorry for pushing. And while that didn't magically fix everything between us, it drew a very clear line about respect and boundaries that our marriage desperately needed. And as for Jess, things were awkward for a while, but they softened over time because she saw that my decision wasn't followed by cruelty or coldness toward her. I still showed up to her art shows, helped her look for scholarships, proofread her essays, and celebrated her acceptance just as genuinely as before. And eventually she thanked me for being honest with her instead of pretending the money was never an option. And that mattered to me more than Kevin's approval ever could, because grief doesn't expire just because life moves on. And honoring a child you lost isn't something you compromise on to keep the peace. And if that made me the bad guy in some people's version of events, I can live with that. Because the money didn't disappear into nothing. It went to a place where terrified parents sit beside hospital beds praying their children survive. And if even one family got a little relief because of Emma's name on that donation, then I know I did the right thing, even if it cost me comfort. Even if it exposed fault lines in my marriage, because love after loss requires honesty, not sacrifice demanded under the guise of family. And I will never apologize for protecting the memory of my daughter from being treated like a convenient solution. Story to my parents humiliated me at my sister's graduation. They joked that I was a mistake compared to my perfect sister, so I shocked them by this at my sister's graduation. I felt absolutely ashamed of my own parents. They denigrated me in front of everyone, even our closest friends and relatives. This was supposed to be only about Elena, my older sister. She was excited to start her new path because she had recently graduated from college and secured an amazing job. When my parents stood up to speak in her honor, I expected them to make appropriate remarks. She has worked hard to reach this milestone and deserves every bit of credit. I was not surprised when during their address they included Elena as one of the greatest blessings. I was old enough by then to recognize that my parents adored Elena more than they loved me. She had always been the more gifted daughter, and my parents would constantly compare me to her. Then my parents began to joke in their speech about how they should have stopped having children after Elena. They argued that secondborns are usually useless. They said that if they only had Elena in their lives, they could have spent more time and effort on her instead of me. Hearing them say such awful things openly and casually while I was sitting right there stunned me. I searched the room hoping that anybody would notice how disturbing their statements were, but all I saw were the faces of my relatives laughing along as if this horrible simile were simply light entertainment. Though my parents had often made me feel inferior and useless, this was the first time they had done I totally, leaving no room for me to hide from the fact in their opinion I simply lacked in comparison to their beautiful daughter Elena. This was not an isolated incident or moment of poor judgment. It reinforced what I had long suspected. I was considered a distant afterglow, whereas my older sister would always be the daughter they adored. Growing up as a second child, I became accustomed to our household's implied preference. It constantly crept into their speech, conduct, and routines. My parents frequently forgot to wish me a happy birthday, and on more than one occasion they were on business travels, leaving me alone. They would never miss Elena's moment every year without fail. Both of my parents would be there planning a spectacular event and ensuring Mom felt honored. Seeing how they showered her with love on her special day taught me early on to manage my expectations and accept that my birthday was not that important to them as an opinionated youngster. My parents regularly informed me that I was disruptive or unpleasant just because of who I was. I was labeled problematic because I did not fit the quiet, restrained mold they appeared to like, and I was punished for something as simple as being too chatty or honest in expressing my interests. Elena's calm temperament and introverted tendencies, on the other hand, were constantly lauded in our family. She was regarded as the ideal daughter, as she was mature and polite. She was thus the one who was displayed and paraded in front of everyone. Over the years, I was the one who received the most criticism. I tried for a while to suit the picture my parents seemed to want. I put in the effort, believing that if I acted better, accomplished more, or followed their plan, they would eventually see me differently. But as I grew older, it became clear that I couldn't simply shape myself into Elena's clone. We were two separate people. I tried so hard, but I couldn't be her. I eventually gave up and attempted to adjust to their constant adulation. I've heard the way they would brag about her accomplishments to anybody who would listen, while dismissing everything I had ever done. Still hurt terribly. All of those occurrences, as devastating as they were, had at least remained within our household. I was amazed at how casually they exposed everything at the graduation ceremony. All of those incidents, as traumatic as they were, had at least remained within the family. I was astonished by how casually my parents disgraced me during their speech. At Elena's graduation, my parents had never embarrassed me in front of others, so they had never shown the rest of the extended family how little respect they had for me. What hurt me even more was had no one in my entire family showed displeasure or told my parents how inappropriate this was. Nobody even glanced sympathetically at me. After my parents cracked those jokes at my expense, my parents continued to lie Elena, and their tones conveyed a sense of pride that I had never seen directed at me. Then they brazenly announced that they had bought her a graduation present, a brand new automobile, which she had always wanted to buy. With everyone's attention on Elena, who hugged my parents with love and gratitude, the room erupted in applause, laughter, and clapping. The three of them were really content. I felt like an outsider in my own family. The funny thing is that I've never been envious of Elena. We'd always gotten along well enough, and I believe she deserved whatever good fortune came along. But that speech broke me. The truth is that after that awful speech I addressed my parents, for years I had silently endured their favoritism, scorn, and unpleasant words. I took it all in and convinced myself that if I just tried to be strong and calm instead of irritated, things would get better. But that evening, after the speech and their joke in front of everyone, I had reached a breaking point. I was tired of taking everything in and pretending that their comments didn't sting anymore. I thus resolved that I could no longer remain silent. I must have the courage to speak up, hoping that my parents would see how deeply their act had hurt me. I wanted them to at least show that they cared enough to listen to me. I wanted them to recognize the misery they had caused over the years and accept the embarrassment I felt at the moment. If I told them how I felt, I figured they'd regret what they said, or at least feel awful about making me appear so little. When I eventually confronted them, I received a cold, scornful response. They paid little attention to my words. Rather than offering sorrow or an apology, they told me I was exaggerating, as if years of being ignored and denigrated could be so easily dismissed. They acted as if I had no right to be furious with them, or as if my feelings did not matter. My father went so far as to remark that I had nothing to be proud of when it came to me, and that I should not hold it against them if they were disappointed with who I was. I recall how casually he stated it, as if my presence did not matter to him. My mother, on the other hand, told me to stop overreacting, and pointed out that I was being overly needy by being upset over something so insignificant. It felt as if my parents were saying I hadn't earned the basic respect of being their child, because I hadn't done enough, that I was somehow less deserving of their pride or care than Elena, simply because I wasn't her. The matter even resurfaced to Elena, who defended my parents and obviously demanded that I be less harsh with them. She said something that truly hit home, and I'll never forget. I shouldn't have been so outraged by their graduation speech because it was merely a harmless jest. Elena assured me that if I had studied and worked hard like she did, I could make them proud as well. Among all the words, those that struck the most deeply, it was dreadful to learn I hadn't worked hard enough to earn their respect. She made it sound so simple, as if all the years of effort I had put in were invisible to her, as if my difficulties and attempts to get a job had no bearing. As the older sister, I expected her to protect me in some way, but she didn't. That seemed like betrayal coming from her. Looking back, that conversation turned things around. I realized then that I had left my family behind, done trying to win their approval, done clarifying for them, and done hoping for something that would never come, love or affirmation. I put all of my work into making something for myself. Starting that day, I immersed myself in my studies, focusing on the things I could influence and create my destiny. 2 years later, all of my hard work paid off when I was accepted on a full scholarship to my dream institution. This was a personal accomplishment for me. This was entirely my own accomplishment, the result of my dedication, determination, and refusal to let my family's neglect define me. After achieving that goal, it appeared for the First time that I had done something quite personal when I gave my parents news. They were almost as astonished as if they had never expected me to attend college in the first place. Never alone on a scholarship, Elena scrutinized my admission letter twice as if she didn't believe I was capable of doing things on my own clearly. They had all underestimated me, and watching their surprise made me slightly thrilled. I simply shook my head at her remark, but my mother then turned my mood sour by saying that it was a good thing I had received a full scholarship, because they hadn't set aside any college funds for me anyhow. My parents had no issue paying Elena's tuition, despite their lack of foresight in saving for me. When it was time to move out, I simply packed my belongings and left the house for my college apartment that day. I made a determined decision to cut off all contact with Elena and my parents. I felt no need to explain my intentions. They had consistently demonstrated after all that my feelings, opinions, and values had little influence on them. Why should I exhaust myself trying to explain something they had shown unable to acknowledge, since they hadn't even provided an apology that might restore the years of neglect and agony they had caused me? I recognized that arguing with them was pointless. My family contacted me frequently over the next few weeks and months, sending emails and messages in the vague hope that they had reconsidered their actions and had reached out to make amends. I initially felt compelled to open them. However, each message served as a sour reminder of who they were. Their communications were filled with attempt to mislead me into believing I was the one acting erratically instead of accepting responsibility for the years of mental pain they had caused. They believed I had overreacted, dismissing my decision to end relationships as immature and impulsive. Their statements consistently returned to the underlying truth: I was the one dissolving the family, so I was wrong to cut them off. I never bothered to respond to any of them. So far, my college experience has been quite positive. I've been able to devote my full attention to my studies, hobbies, and most importantly, connections with people who love and see me for who I am. Working part-time at a neighboring diner has helped me save for the future. Meeting new people in the diner and talking about their life is interesting. I've cut off contact with my family and immersed myself in my studies, social life, and everything my new surroundings have to offer by filling my days with important events. I haven't missed them or wondered about how they are doing. Once yesterday I received an unexpected email from my parents. I found it shocking. They stopped writing to me long ago because I had never answered any of their previous communications. My parents encouraged me in this email to contact them soon, away, since they had some bad news to tell me still. I felt my chest tighten. Despite everything, years of hurt and rejection could not erase the constant feeling that something terrible had occurred. My heart started racing, and all I could think about was the possibility that a family member had been seriously ill, or worse, perished. Despite my resolution to keep them at a distance, fear crept in my heart, hammering as I braced myself for or whatever news they were about to bring. I grabbed my phone, unblocked them, and called them immediately back. Elena, who was going through a difficult personal situation, was troubled by the news my parents wanted to share with me. They stated that she had been dealing with drug addiction, which had severely impacted her life. They said that her addiction had gotten so bad that she had lost her job, spent her savings, and was now left with no resources or options. I had no idea Elena was going through anything like this, so the news completely surprised me. She has always been my dependable, high-achieving sibling. However, that same sister became addicted to drugs. I found it tough to believe Elena's addiction was so unbelievable in my parents' eyes that it shattered their perception of her, their incredulity, desperation, and most importantly, their tremendous concern about how this would affect their reputation if others found out. Shocked me. They hoped I'd have some answers for them, as they described everything. Elena had always appeared to be grounded and responsible, so it was startling that she of all people had fallen victim to something as dangerous as heroin addiction. My father then asked me in a mistrustful tone, "You didn't introduce her to drugs back then, did you?" The ramifications surprised me. Not only was the idea completely absurd, but it was also very disgusting to think they may assume I had anything to do with Elena's troubles, much alone anything as serious as introducing her to drugs. How could I bring drugs to my older sister? I mean, I never do drugs myself. Furthermore, I hadn't spoken with Elena or the rest of my family in years due to their mistreatment of me. Having been removed from their life, I had focused on carving my own path away from their toxicity in the face of their immaculate image of Elena breaking. They were quick to point fingers at someone else, and I was clearly the easiest target. I advised them to speak with Elena before making any assumptions, and I told them that they were unwise to even suspect meth through our conversation. I noticed that my parents were more concerned with the shame that would befall the family if Elena's admissions were public rather than expressing concern for her. My mother appeared fascinated with her immaculate daughter's clandestine actions. She kept talking about how unexpected it was to discover this aspect of herself and how others would respond if they ever found out. Elena and Dad were overwhelmed and unprepared to deal with the situation, so my mother begged me to return home. So I could assist them in caring for Elena. My mother implored me. I mean, what did we even do? I feel so ashamed of her, so maybe you can talk to her for us as if this were a legitimate demand to make. After years of not communicating, I can't help Elena. She needs professional help. I stated bluntly. I emphasized that if they truly cared about her well-being and wanted to help her recover, the finest and most compassionate thing they could do was to admit her to a treatment facility where trained specialists could assist her. But my father immediately rejected the idea of sending her to rehab, nearly trembling at the thought of their family's good name being tarnished by her admission to a treatment center. He was obsessed with the possibility of their reputation being harmed by sending her to such a location. He claimed it would only assist to damage their reputation. The thought of people knowing that their only accomplished daughter had a sickness as serious as heroin addiction horrified him. My father chided me for even considering this option, as if openly admitting her addiction was more shameful, and as if constant surveillance would magically fix the problem. Dad insisted that I return home and that the three of us work together to care for Elena, putting her under constant observation to prevent a relapse. He kept saying how much they wanted Elena to feel better and get back to her normal life as soon as possible. Their perspective was that everything would return to normal as long as no one else knew. They wanted me to take part in a charade pretending everything was okay, while keeping her issues hidden from everyone else. I got outraged and incredulous as I listened. Why were my parents so concerned with what others thought about them and their reputation? Here was an opportunity for my parents to truly stand up, to demonstrate that they could prioritize their daughter's needs over appearances and transform her life. My sister was plainly suffering from something serious, yet they still struggled to do the proper thing. These people had not altered all that much. Obviously, on top of that, they were now attempting to entice me back and urging to maintain this family front by assisting them in caring for the sister. They frequently likened me to I claimed I needed some time to think about things. I can't just walk away. After all, I have classes and a job to consider. My parents insisted that I take at least 2 or 3 weeks off to help them, because they really needed me right now. About everything, I'm torn. Part of me wants to see what I can do for Elena to make sure she's okay. Another side of me is selfish, allowing my parents to manage their golden child fully on their own. I'm not sure I can be of much help because they are more concerned with saving face than with addressing the root of the problem. Even today, I wonder if I should refuse to return home and care for my drug-addicted sister. Update 1. The story didn't appear like it was going to explode. It is taking some time to look through the hundreds of comments I have received. I wanted to clear up a few things. I don't hate Elena, actually. I want to help her and genuinely care about her. However, because I have not spoken with my family in 3 years, I have experienced a level of serenity and stability that I did not have previously. I am concerned that reconnecting with Elena may allow my parents to re-enter my life as well. I honestly do not know for sure. If you're wondering, Elena could have been fighting with heroin addiction for years, possibly even before my parents discovered it. Clearly, Elena, the golden child, was praised and kept as the ideal daughter, frequently under intense pressure to maintain that image. This form of pedestal minimizes susceptibility and failure. Any failure, no matter how little, could have been devastating. If Elena believed her worth was solely determined by her accomplishments, and how others perceived her, drugs could have developed over time as a coping mechanism for escaping the weight of those expectations or the fear of disappointing our parents. I become even more depressed when I think about my sister, who may have been suffering silently all along without my knowledge. She should have felt comfortable being honest with me earlier, before things got to this point. I would have wanted to better for her, to help her get through it. It just makes me feel powerless. If only I had known about this significant part of her life and could have helped her. My parents expected the best of me and my sister from an early age, because they are both high achievers. Personally, I need some time to analyze everything. I will notify you if anything further develops. Update 2. After considerable internal thought and encouragement from some of the comments I read, I decided to contact Elena. She is my sister despite everything. As a result, I believed it was critical to hear from her directly rather than basing my decisions on my parents' interpretations of events. First, I texted her a short note asking if she wanted to chat. She responded some hours later, but only agreed to a phone call. When I finally spoke with her, the voice on the other end of the telephone seemed like a shadow of the sister I knew. Elena's tone was obviously weighted, softer and more careful. She slowly revealed what she was going through. Elena stated that she had fought with addiction for several years at Big, and shortly after college, when she began working for her law business, she struggled to maintain that status at work by continually working harder than others to impress her supervisor. In the hopes of receiving more credit or a promotion, she began to feel burned out. After being the perfect, highly talented daughter for so long, Elena felt she couldn't slow down or get treatment because she had to live up to the expectations everyone had for her. When stress got unbearable, a friend recommended using recreation drugs. When Before she knew it, what began as intermittent use had become into reliance. Elena also stated that she felt imprisoned for the longest time. She couldn't tell her parents she was struggling since she knew how they would react. She felt alone due to their obsessive attention to appearances and denial of anything that contradicted their narrative. She maintained the facade, acting as if everything was fine. Even as she began to lose control, she couldn't hide the fact any longer. So she spiraled, lost her job, and depleted her savings. She wondered whether I was criticizing her as harshly